When everyone gave up on the impossible code, she whispered 3 words, "I can do it." They laughed, until the homeless woman did what even the billionaire's best engineers couldn't. The boardroom of Apex Innovations looked like the inside of a spaceship: glass walls, glowing screens, and rows of exhausted engineers with defeated faces. For weeks, they had tried to fix the company's new AI security system, a Billionaire project that could collapse the entire business if it failed. The billionaire, a tall, dark-skinned man in his early 40s, stood at the head of the room. His navy blue suit was flawless, his gold wristwatch gleaming under the lights, but his eyes burned with disappointment. 6 months, he said, his deep voice echoing through the room. 6 months and no one can fix this? Silence filled the air. Some engineers avoided eye contact. Others just stared blankly at the screen flashing error 404, system corrupted. Just then, the door creaked open. A faint shuffle of feet echoed through the hallway before a woman stepped in. Her dress was torn, her sandals worn thin, and her dark brown skin glistened with the sweat of someone who had been outside for too long. Her hair was tied loosely under a scarf, her eyes sharp and intelligent despite the exhaustion on her face. "I can do it," she said softly. The entire room turned toward her. A few people chuckled. One of the senior engineers whispered, "Who let her in?" The billionaire frowned, confused. "Excuse me, who are you?" She took a deep breath. "My name doesn't matter, sir. I used to be a programmer, before life happened." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't back down. She looked straight at the flashing red screen and continued, "That error code, it's not the system's fault. It's a loop conflict caused by mirrored encryption keys. You're trying to unlock a door with the wrong key." The laughter stopped. For the first time, the billionaire's expression shifted. "You understand the system?" he asked, his tone calmer now. She nodded. "I helped design something similar years ago, before I lost my job and," she paused, her gaze lowering briefly, "before I lost my home." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Some rolled their eyes. Others whispered that she was crazy. But the billionaire raised a hand, silencing the room. "Bring her a laptop." The crowd murmured in disbelief. Within seconds, an assistant placed a laptop in front of her. She sat down slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. Then, click by click, she began to type. Lines of code danced across the screen. Her movements were swift, confident, and precise. The silence in the room was deafening, only the sound of her keystrokes echoed. Then, the red error vanished. The screen blinked once, then turned green. A message appeared, "System restored." Gasps filled the room. Engineers stood up from their seats. The billionaire's eyes widened as he stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and awe on his face. The woman leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I told you," she said quietly, "I can do it." The billionaire slowly approached her, his voice low but full of respect. "Who are you?" She smiled faintly. "Someone you fired 5 years ago." The room froze again. The billionaire's face paled as realization hit. And just like that, the woman who had walked in barefoot, the one they had laughed at, had rewritten not just his code, but the entire story of that company. For a long, heavy minute, no one moved. The air inside the sleek Apex Innovations boardroom was thick with disbelief. The billionaire, still standing a few steps away from her, tried to process the words that had just left her mouth. "Someone you fired 5 years ago." Those words hit him harder than any public scandal ever could. He studied her face again, the sharp cheekbones, the intelligent eyes, the familiar tone in her voice. A memory flickered in his mind like a glitching hologram. It was 5 years ago, during a product failure crisis. A junior programmer had challenged his decision in a meeting, warning that his leadership team's shortcut could cost the company millions. Back then, he saw her as too bold, too emotional. He had fired her on the spot. No questions asked. And now, here she was, that same woman, standing before him, wearing a torn dress and dusty sandals, saving the empire he had almost lost. The billionaire's voice came out low, almost hoarse. "What's your name?" She looked up, meeting his eyes without fear this time. Grace, she said. Grace Ocone. The moment the name fell from her lips, a wave of murmurs spread across the room. Everyone in Apex had heard of Grace Ocone, the brilliant programmer who once exposed a major data leak, only to be blacklisted by industry insiders afterward. Some said she went abroad. Others said she died. But she was here, very much alive. The billionaire turned slightly, avoiding her gaze. His tall, dark-skinned frame looked smaller than usual under the sterile white lights. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table, not out of anger this time, but regret. Grace sat quietly, her posture straight but humble. Her dark brown skin glowed faintly under the light, and the faint trace of exhaustion in her eyes made her look both strong and fragile. There was a quiet dignity about her, one born from pain that had already been survived. One of the engineers whispered, "Sir, should we escort her out now that the code's fixed?" The billionaire shot him a sharp look. "No," he said. "No one is escorting anyone out." Grace blinked, surprised. He walked closer and pulled out a chair beside her. "Sit," he said softly, then caught himself. Please, stay seated." The same employees who had mocked her minutes ago now watched in silence as their powerful boss, a man known for his pride, sat beside a homeless woman with deep respect in his eyes. "Grace," he said slowly, "you just did what the best engineers in Nigeria couldn't. You didn't just fix the system, you saved my company. And I—" He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology." Grace shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I didn't come here for revenge or pity. I came because I couldn't stand watching something I helped build fall apart." Her voice carried weight, calm but heavy with emotion. The billionaire exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Do you have anywhere to go after this?" Grace smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "Nowhere permanent. I sleep where the rain doesn't reach." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Every person in that room, from the assistant in designer heels to the senior coder clutching his tablet, suddenly felt small. The billionaire looked around, then stood up. "Get her a room at the executive suite," he ordered. Grace immediately shook her head. "No, sir. That's not necessary." "It's not charity," he interrupted gently. "It's gratitude." The crowd stared as the billionaire, a man who once dismissed her dreams with a wave of his hand, now stood protecting her with that same authority. He turned toward the boardroom door. "And cancel all my meetings for today," he said. "There's someone I need to make things right with." Then he looked back at her, and his next words made Grace's heart stop. "Grace, would you come with me?" Her breath caught. "Where to, sir?" He smiled slightly, a smile filled with something more than corporate pride. "To where it all began." Grace's eyes widened as she realized what he meant, the old research lab she once worked in before everything fell apart. The billionaire nodded to his driver, and the two of them walked out together, side by side. For the first time in years, the people inside Apex Innovations didn't just see a CEO and a stranger. They saw two stories reconnecting, one of power and one of pain. And for the billionaire, this wasn't just a trip down memory lane. It was a journey toward redemption. A chance to right the one mistake that had haunted him for years. The road to the old lab was quiet, stretching endlessly through the industrial outskirts of Lagos. The billionaire's sleek black SUV glided through the streets, tinted windows reflecting the golden afternoon sun. Inside, silence sat heavy between him and Grace, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that comes when two people carry too many memories to speak. As they drove past rusting signboards and abandoned warehouses, Grace's eyes softened with nostalgia. The world had changed, but this place, this forgotten district, still smelled of machine oil, old concrete, and lost dreams. When the car finally stopped, she hesitated before stepping out. The building stood exactly as she remembered, faded blue paint peeling off the walls, broken glass on the floor, weeds crawling through cracks in the pavement. Once, it had been the heart of innovation, Apex's first research and development lab. Now, it was nothing more than a graveyard for abandoned ideas. The billionaire stepped out quietly, his tall, dark figure framed against the fading light. He wore no jacket now, just a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, the kind of look that made him appear more human than powerful. The air around him carried a strange mix of pride, shame, and melancholy. Grace stood beside him, her brown skin glowing faintly under the golden light. Her old sandals crunched against the gravel as she walked closer to the gate. "I remember this place," she murmured. "We worked here day and night, dreaming about the future." The billionaire nodded slowly. "You were one of my best minds, Grace. But I was too proud to see it." She looked at him, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. "Pride blinds faster than darkness, sir." He turned to her, eyes full of regret. "You called me sir even now, after what I did to you?" Grace looked down, brushing the dust off the metal gate. "Because I still respect what you once stood for, before you became what you are now." Her words cut through the air like quiet thunder. He sighed, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. "After I fired you that day, I thought I was doing the right thing. I told myself discipline was leadership. But the truth..." He paused. "I was scared. You challenged me, and I didn't know how to face that." Grace said nothing. The wind carried the faint hum of traffic from far away, as if Lagos itself was listening. He continued, voice softer now. "When I heard what happened afterward, how no one would hire you because I blacklisted you, I wanted to apologize. But I didn't know how." Grace turned to him, eyes glistening. "So you didn't? You just forgot me?" He swallowed hard, guilt flashing across his face. "I tried to." A pause stretched between them, heavy, aching, full of unspoken pain. Then Grace smiled faintly, eyes distant. "It's strange. The world sees you as untouchable, but that day when you fired me you looked afraid. Like you were fighting more than just me." The billionaire looked away, jaw tightening. "You're right," he admitted. "I was. My company was collapsing. My investors were turning their backs. I took it out on everyone who believed in me." He stared at the cracked windows of the lab. "You didn't deserve that." Grace's eyes softened. "We all fall, sir. But not everyone learns." For the first time, the billionaire met her gaze and smiled. A small, sincere smile that made him look younger. "I'm learning now." They stepped inside together. Dust floated lazily in the sunlight streaming through the broken roof. Faded posters still hung on the walls. Slogans like "Innovation is freedom and dream without limits." Grace reached out and brushed her fingers over an old computer monitor. "I built my first prototype here," she whispered. "We were designing an algorithm that could predict cyber attacks before they happened." He chuckled softly. "And I thought you were crazy for it." She smiled, eyes twinkling. "You fired me before I could prove it worked." He raised an eyebrow. "Wait, are you saying it did?" She nodded slowly. "It did. I finished it after I lost everything. Sold the design to a foreign investor just to survive. That's what I used to buy the laptop that fixed your system yesterday." The billionaire froze. "Grace, you're the reason my company's security hasn't collapsed in the last 2 years?" She shrugged. "Maybe fate wanted you to remember me." For a long moment, he just stared at her, not as an employer, not as a but as a man humbled by life. "Grace," he said quietly, "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'd like a second chance, not to lead you this time, but to work beside you." Grace blinked in surprise. "You're asking me to come back?" He shook his head. "No. I'm asking you to lead." Her breath caught. "Lead." He nodded slowly, his tone firm. "Apex needs a new head of innovation, someone who knows struggle, who remembers what it's like to build from dust. That's you." Grace's hand trembled as she looked around the abandoned lab, the very place where her dreams had died once before. To think, she was standing here again, not as a victim, but as a leader reborn. "Why me?" she whispered. The billionaire smiled softly. "Because only those who've been broken know how to rebuild." Tears welled in her eyes. The same floor where she once cried in despair now held the echoes of redemption. Grace nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let's rebuild it together." As they stood in the center of the old lab, the setting sun cast a warm orange glow across their faces, Two dark-skinned souls standing amid the ruins of the past, finally ready to create something new. Outside, the first evening breeze rustled through the broken windows, carrying with it the promise of healing, growth, and destiny reborn. The next morning, the lobby of Apex Innovations was brighter than usual. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, washing the entire space in gold. The air hummed with low murmurs as employees gathered in small clusters, eyes darting toward the main elevator. They had heard rumors, wild, unbelievable whispers about the billionaire CEO's sudden change of heart. And then, at exactly 9 a.m., the elevator doors slid open. The billionaire stepped out first. His tall, dark frame cut through the light. His black tailored suit sharp, his shoes gleaming, his posture calm yet commanding. But his face was different today, softer, humbler, almost peaceful. Walking beside him, dressed in a crisp white blouse and a navy blue skirt, was the woman they all used to mock, Grace. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The same woman who had once been thrown out of the building for trespassing now walked beside the man who owned it. Her rich brown skin glowed under the lights, her hair neatly tied in a bun. She looked graceful, confident, and unbothered by the stares. A thin silver bracelet on her wrist glimmered, the only accessory she owned, a reminder of her past life. The billionaire glanced around the lobby, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "Good morning, everyone. I know many of you are wondering why I called for a company-wide meeting on such short notice. But what's about to happen today will mark the rebirth of Apex." He led the way to the conference hall, the same hall where he once humiliated Grace in front of dozens of staff. Now it was filled to the brim. Managers, engineers, receptionists, and janitors all stood waiting. Cameras clicked. Even the board members, the very ones who had urged him to fire her years ago, looked uneasy. Grace followed behind him, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. She paused for a brief moment near the corner of the room, where she had once knelt to pick up her scattered belongings after being fired. Her chest tightened, but she didn't let the emotion break her composure. Instead, she lifted her chin and took her seat beside the CEO's chair, a seat she had never dreamed of occupying. The billionaire walked to the podium, resting both hands on the sleek glass surface. 2 years ago, he began, I made the worst mistake of my career. I let pride blind me. I let ego silence wisdom. And in doing so, I destroyed the one person who could have saved this company long ago. The hall fell into complete silence. Even the air conditioner's hum seemed to fade. He continued, voice steady but emotional. Many of you remember Grace, the woman I fired without cause. You saw her leave this building in tears. Some of you laughed. Some of you stayed silent. And I did nothing to stop it. Eyes widened. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But last night, he said, that same woman saved this company. She solved the code that none of my best engineers could crack. She did what 100 of us failed to do. And today, I stand before you to make things right. He turned toward Grace, his gaze firm yet kind. From this day forward, Grace Adeola is the new head of innovation and development at Apex. The announcement hit the room like a thunderclap. Murmurs exploded into gasps, and disbelief spread like wildfire. One of the board members, a bald man in a gray suit, stood abruptly. Sir, this is highly irregular. She's just a former employee. We can't. The billionaire raised a hand, silencing him instantly. She's the only reason we're not bankrupt this morning, he said coldly. And if this company has space for anyone, it has space for those who earn it through brilliance, not titles. Applause began slowly, first from the janitors at the back, then from the younger engineers, and finally, the entire hall erupted in clapping. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Grace remained seated for a moment, overwhelmed. She looked around the room, at the same faces that once looked down on her, and then slowly rose. Her voice, calm and clear, carried across the hall. I don't have the power or the money you all have, she said, but I have something I've learned through pain, humility. You can lose everything in a second, but what you choose to become after loss, that's who you truly are. The billionaire smiled faintly, nodding as the hall roared again in applause. As the noise settled, he leaned toward her slightly and whispered, "You've just written the first page of a new chapter for us all." She turned to him, eyes soft but strong. "No, sir," she said. "We wrote it together." The billionaire looked out across the crowd, his dark skin glistening faintly under the ceiling lights. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He felt like the most human. As the meeting ended, Grace stood beside him at the front, not behind, not below, but beside. Employees lined up to greet her, some apologizing quietly for the past, others simply smiling in awe. Outside, through the glass walls, Lagos shimmered with life, cars honking, vendors shouting, the hum of the city's endless rhythm. But inside that hall, something had shifted forever. A billionaire had humbled himself. A homeless woman had risen. And Apex Innovations, once crumbling, had just been reborn. The next day, the grand lobby of Apex Innovations felt heavier than ever before. The morning sun poured through the tall glass walls, but it couldn't melt the tension hanging in the air. Employees whispered in corners, pretending to check emails while keeping their eyes on the boardroom door. Inside, something historic was about to unfold. The billionaire sat at the head of the long glass table, his dark brown skin glowing faintly under the soft ceiling lights. His expression was calm, but his sharp eyes scanned the room with quiet power. He wasn't the same man who had once led with ego and intimidation. Today, he carried the stillness of someone who had faced himself. At his right sat Grace Adeola, no longer in her tattered clothes or her borrowed scarf, but in a simple yet elegant white blouse and a navy blue skirt. Her hair, neatly braided and tied back, reflected the same poise she had shown since the day she solved the impossible code. There was no pride in her eyes, only purpose. Across the table sat the board members, the very people who had once mocked her, laughed at her dreams, and dismissed her as a nuisance. Now, they shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats, their gazes darting between the billionaire and Grace. The same engineers who once called her the homeless girl now sat quietly with their hands folded. The billionaire cleared his throat. "Yesterday," he began, "you all witnessed a miracle. This company was moments away from collapse. Every system, every account, every investor, gone. But one woman brought us back from the brink." He looked toward Grace, and she lowered her gaze humbly. "Today," he continued, "we face the truth, not about our finances, but about our hearts. Because what destroyed Apex wasn't failure of code. It was failure of character." A murmur spread across the table. One of the engineers, a young man with dark skin and a neatly trimmed beard, raised his trembling hand. "Sir, we didn't know who she was. We thought." The billionaire cut him off gently. "You thought she was beneath you." The words hit harder than a slap. Silence followed. He rose from his seat, tall and commanding. "Let me remind you, genius wears no label. Talent doesn't come wrapped in luxury. And respect is not a privilege, it's a duty." He walked slowly around the table, stopping behind each of the senior staff who had contributed to Grace's humiliation. "When she first came here," he said, voice deep and calm, "you laughed at her shoes. You mocked her voice. You turned away when she asked for help. But when this company was bleeding, none of your degrees, none of your titles, none of your cars could save it." He stopped behind Grace, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She could." A woman at the far end of the table, the HR manager who had once ordered security to escort Grace out, bowed her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "Sir, please. I was wrong. We were all wrong." Grace turned toward her, her soft brown eyes kind and steady. "It's not me you should apologize to," she said quietly. "It's yourself. Because when you lose compassion, you lose everything that makes you human." The billionaire nodded in agreement. Then, taking a deep breath, he said, "Apex will not move forward unless we move differently. From this moment on, I am appointing Grace as the Director of Integrity and Human Development. Her mission, to rebuild not our brand, but our humanity." Gasps filled the room again. Grace looked stunned. "I can't possibly." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "Because you already have." The room filled with quiet applause. Even those who had despised her couldn't deny what she had done. The billionaire raised his hand again, silencing the clapping. "And one more thing," he added, "effective immediately, every employee, from the janitor to the top executive, will attend the humility and humanity training sessions that Grace will lead personally. This is not punishment. It's restoration." He glanced at the HR manager. "Start with yourself." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the tension, and for the first time in years, the room didn't feel divided by rank or wealth. Grace rose slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Sir, if I may speak?" He nodded. She turned toward the staff. "I won't lead this company through power or fear. I'll lead it through empathy. I know what it means to be overlooked, to be hungry, to be told you're nothing. But I also know what it means to be given a second chance. And that's what I'll give each of you, the same grace I was shown." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the employees began to stand, engineers, accountants, cleaners, even the board members. Some clapped. Some cried. The billionaire smiled faintly, his eyes soft with pride. "Looks like Apex finally found its code," he said quietly. "Not the one written in numbers, the one written in hearts." Grace turned to him, smiling back. "And this time, sir," she said, "we'll never delete it." Outside, the afternoon sun glowed brighter against the glass walls. The city of Lagos moved on, unaware of the transformation taking place inside that boardroom. Inside Apex Innovations, humility had rewritten history. And the homeless woman who once whispered, "I can do it," had done far more than anyone expected. She didn't just solve the code. She changed the soul of a billionaire, and the future of everyone who ever doubted her. The grand auditorium of Apex Innovations shimmered that evening with gold lights and energy. Banners hung across the walls reading, "Rebirth Gala, a new code of humanity." The hall was filled with hundreds, investors, staff, journalists, and the curious public, all waiting to witness the company's historic rebirth. At the center of the stage stood the billionaire, dressed in a crisp white agbada embroidered with subtle gold patterns. His tall frame and deep brown skin glowed under the spotlights, but there was no trace of arrogance left in his expression, only peace. Beside him stood Grace, radiant in a long emerald green gown that shimmered softly with each step. Her dark skin gleamed beautifully under the warm lights, and her neatly braided hair was wrapped in a simple African scarf. Gone was the timid homeless woman who once stood at the gate. Now she stood straight, proud, and serene, embodying dignity itself. The audience erupted in applause as the billionaire raised his hand. The room fell silent. He smiled faintly and spoke into the microphone. "Not long ago," he began, his deep voice echoing across the hall, "I believed power and intellect were the only things that made a person valuable. I was wrong. True strength comes from humility, and brilliance from kindness." He paused, glancing at Grace with quiet admiration. "This woman, whom the world once mocked, saved everything I built. She taught me what no business school ever could, that sometimes the greatest leaders come from the streets, not the boardrooms." The hall went still. Journalists stopped writing. Some wiped their eyes. He turned toward the crowd, lifting a small glass plaque. "Tonight, we honor the one who reminded us of humanity. Grace Adeola, you are not just an employee of Apex, you are its heartbeat." Applause thundered through the hall as he handed her the plaque engraved with the words, "For faith, courage, and grace." Grace held it with trembling hands, tears shining in her eyes. She turned to the audience, took a deep breath, and began to speak softly, her voice calm but filled with strength. "There was a time," she said, "I slept under bridges and thought I'd never be seen again. But life taught me something. When you have nothing left, you still have your voice. And sometimes, all it takes is courage to say 3 words, I can do it." The crowd clapped again, but she lifted her hand for silence. "But remember," she continued, her tone warm and firm, "doing it alone isn't enough. Lift others as you rise. Respect every hand that cleans your office, every voice that speaks softly. You never know who carries the key to your miracle." The billionaire nodded, his eyes moist with pride. Spoken like a true leader, he said. As music filled the hall, Grace stepped down from the stage to greet the staff who had once mocked her. The same engineer who had laughed the loudest now stood in front of her, head bowed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She smiled gently. "You're forgiven. We all fail our tests before we pass them." Outside, fireworks began to light up the Lagos night sky. The city glowed with energy and celebration, but inside the hall, it wasn't just success being celebrated, it was transformation. The billionaire turned toward Grace once more. "Apex has found its new light," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Not the brilliance of technology, but the light of the human spirit." Grace smiled. "Then let it shine for everyone, sir, even for those still in the dark." The crowd rose to its feet in applause as the music swelled. Cameras flashed, banners fluttered, and the spotlight slowly dimmed over the two of them standing side by side, the billionaire and the woman who rewrote his world. As the screen faded to black, soft words appeared. "Never laugh at a dreamer, never mock the broken, because every soul carries a code only faith can unlock." Sparkle's moral of the tale: humility builds bridges that pride will always burn. No matter how low someone falls, kindness can rewrite their destiny, and even change the heart of a billionaire.